Trig 29 was not a famous city, a great fortress, or a dramatic mountain. It was a piece of high ground in the northern part of the El Alamein battlefield, an observation point southwest of Tel Elisa. Important because in the desert, even modest height could decide what could be seen and what could be held. To soldiers on the ground, it was a rise, a marker, a defended objective, and soon a place of repeated attack and counterattack. The 9th Australian Division's fight for Trig 29 matters because it turns the vast battle of El Alamein into something intimate and understandable. Here, the larger armored struggle depended on infantry seizing a small feature, holding it under pressure, and forcing Rommel to respond with strength he could ill afford.
If you would like to move beyond the podcast, you can see my available books at militaryauthor.me. And at trackpads.com, you will find magazines and galleries with hundreds of thousands of photos and videos to explore.
The name itself came from a survey point, a triangulation marker used to identify height and location in a landscape where landmarks were scarce. That detail is important for a mapless listener. In the open desert, a small rise could be more than a bump in the ground. It could give observers a better view over tracks, minefield exits, artillery positions, and approaching movement. It could help guns find targets, or help commanders judge whether an attack was forming. Trig 29 mattered because it offered eyes. An army that controlled such a feature could see more clearly, and in a mechanized battle, seeing first often meant firing first, moving reserves earlier, or realizing danger before it became disaster.
The attack on Trig 29 came during Montgomery's crumbling phase, when the original break-in had not produced an immediate breakthrough and pressure shifted heavily toward the northern sector. Australian infantry, supported by artillery and armor where possible, were ordered to take the feature as part of the wider effort to threaten the Axis coastal flank. The specific battalions and brigades mattered to those who served in them, but the central action is straightforward. The Australians moved into a defended position at night under a plan that relied on surprise, fire support, and speed before the enemy could recover. They were not attacking for symbolic prestige. They were attacking because that ground affected the battle around the coast road and the Axis reserves behind it. The night attack had the strange mixture of careful preparation and unavoidable confusion that marked so much of El Alamein. Artillery could mark and suppress, orders could specify objectives, and commanders could brief their men. But darkness changed everything. Units had to keep direction over ground broken by mines, wire, trenches, shell holes, and enemy posts. A company could drift without knowing it. A platoon could become separated, then find itself fighting at close range before anyone at headquarters understood what had happened. Surprise was possible at night, but so was dislocation. At Trig 29, the attackers needed to reach the feature, overcome the defenders, and reorganize quickly enough to survive the inevitable response after dawn. The fighting for the position was close, violent, and personal in a way that broad accounts of tank battles often hide. Men fought around pits, weapon positions, and shallow defenses where grenades, bayonets, small arms, and machine guns mattered as much as artillery and armor. It is important not to invent scenes or pretend to know every individual moment, but the character of such fighting is clear. Once infantry entered a defended locality at night, the battle could become a series of sudden encounters at short range. A position might be cleared, then found to contain another pocket of resistance. Prisoners had to be gathered, wounded men treated, and captured ground turned quickly from an objective into a defensive position. The Australians captured Trig 29, but capture was only the beginning. In a battle like El Alamein, a position was not truly won until it survived counterattack. The defenders had to dig in, sort out units mixed by the night advance, bring forward ammunition, establish communications, and sight anti-tank weapons before German and Italian forces reacted. That was a race against daylight and against Rommel's judgment. The Axis commander understood that the loss of this feature threatened the northern defensive system and might draw the battle closer to the coast road. He therefore had reason to commit serious strength to retake it. Trig 29 became valuable not because of its size, but because of what its loss suggested about the direction of the battle. Axis counterattacks against Trig 29 placed the Australian defenders under enormous strain. German armor, infantry, and artillery, together with Italian elements in the broader sector, pressed against the position, while Allied artillery and air support tried to break up the attacks. The defenders could not simply stand in the open and wait. They had to use the ground, coordinate with guns behind them, and hold nerve when tanks appeared. Anti-tank weapons were essential because infantry alone could not safely absorb armored counterattack in exposed desert. This is where the battle connects directly to armored warfare. The tanks did not need to be the center of the story to shape every decision made by the men holding the hill. Trig 29 also showed the importance of communications under pressure. A forward position had to tell higher headquarters what it needed, where the enemy was forming, and whether it could still hold. Artillery support depended on observers and lines of communication that shellfire could cut or confuse. If a request for fire arrived late, the counterattack might already be close. If headquarters misunderstood the situation, reserves might be sent too slowly or to the wrong place. The feature was small, but the network behind it was large. A company or battalion holding ground in the desert depended on guns, ammunition, medical evacuation, neighboring units, and the confidence that someone behind the line still understood what was happening.
For Rommel, the struggle over Trig 29 contributed to a wider misreading that Montgomery was happy to encourage. The pressure in the north looked dangerous because it was dangerous. Australian attacks were threatening ground near the coast, and the Axis had to respond. Yet every counterattack and every reinforcement sent toward this sector also helped fix Axis attention there. Montgomery was preparing to shift the decisive breakthrough effort to Operation Supercharge, and the continued fighting around the northern features helped hold Rommel's gaze. Trig 29 therefore mattered twice. It was a real tactical objective that had to be defended by exhausted men, and it was also part of a larger operational pattern that shaped where Axis reserves were committed.
The cost of holding such a feature was measured not only in casualties, but in exhaustion and compression. Men in forward positions endured shellfire, dust, noise, thirst, and the fear that the next counterattack would be the one that broke through. Wounded men had to be carried back through dangerous routes, and ammunition had to be brought forward through the same shell-torn approaches. Tank and anti-tank crews faced their own forms of strain, knowing that a few yards of movement or a delayed shot could decide whether infantry behind them survived. Trig 29 became one of those places where the battle narrowed until all the abstractions disappeared. Strategy became a trench, a weapon pit, a wounded man, a runner, a gun crew, and a line that had to be held.
The feature also helps explain why El Alamein's fame as a turning point should not make it sound easy. By this stage, the 8th Army had the advantage in tanks, artillery, air power, and supply, but advantage had to be translated through ground like Trig 29. The Axis were being worn down, but their counterattacks remained dangerous. The Australians were part of a powerful army, but the men on the rise could not experience victory as inevitable. They experienced it as another attack forming, another shell burst, another order to hold on. This is one of the battle's most important teaching points. Material superiority matters, but it does not abolish the local crisis faced by the units at the sharp edge. In the longer development of armored warfare, Trig 29 stands as a reminder that observation and terrain remained decisive even in an age of tanks and aircraft. A small height could influence artillery fire, reserve movement, anti-tank defense, and command confidence. Mechanized armies depend on movement, but movement depends on what commanders can see and what ground they can hold. The fight for Trig 29 was not a sideshow to the tank battle. It was one of the ways the tank battle was made possible, by forcing the enemy to respond, by protecting the northern pressure, and by helping stretch the Axis defense. The rise itself was modest. The consequences of holding it were not. Trig 29 deserves to be remembered because it shows El Alamein at human scale. It was a small point on a huge battlefield, yet it absorbed repeated violence because its possession shaped visibility, pressure, and decision. The Australians who captured and defended it were not merely participating in a national episode of pride. They were performing one of the essential functions of combined arms warfare. They took ground that helped artillery, disrupted the enemy's sense of safety, threatened the coastal flank, and compelled Axis counteraction. The later breakthrough would depend on many such pressures accumulating until the defense could no longer hold. At Trig 29, the Eighth Army's victory was not yet visible as a sweeping advance. It was visible as men on a rise, refusing to give back the ground that made the next stage possible.
You've been listening to Famous Tank Battles. These battles were never just about machines. They were about doctrine, terrain, firepower, logistics, and the hard problem of turning shock into victory. For more military history writing and books, visit militaryauthor.me. And for magazines, podcasts, and a massive archive of military photos and video, visit trackpads.com. Thanks for listening.